Hi everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Learning Kitchen Live. My name is Colleen and I'm one of the dietitians here with Community Servings. As always, I want to give a shout out and thank you to Boston Scientific for supporting Learning Kitchen Live, and remind anyone who's watching that this will be posted on our YouTube channel later, as well as the recipe on our website so that you can follow along and cook at home. So today we are going to be making some chickpea corn patties. And I like to think of this as the best of both worlds between falafel and corn fritters. It's like if those two items had a baby, you would get this recipe. So let's go ahead and jump in. And so I'm going to blend most of the ingredients in a food processor to get started. So I have 1 cup of brown rice that I've already cooked ahead of time. This might seem like kind of a strange ingredient to go into blended patties, but it's going to really give it a creamy texture, which is nice. I'm also going to add in 1 can of low sodium chickpeas. And I didn't drain these, so we actually want the juice that's left in that as well to, again, kind of buff up the texture a little bit. So with any kind of plant-based meal, sometimes we are concerned about getting a complete protein. Complete proteins are needed for your body, and a lot of meats contain them naturally, but when we have a plant-based source of protein, sometimes we have to combine 2 or 3 different foods to create a complete protein. And so when you have a whole grain like brown rice and a legume such as chickpeas, that creates a complete protein together. So that's why, another reason why I like this recipe a lot. I'm also going to add in about half of 1 red onion that I just roughly chopped ahead of time. About 1/4 cup of fresh cilantro. And then I have a spice blend here. This is a mix of 1 teaspoon of garlic powder and then 1/2 teaspoon each of black pepper, chili powder, paprika, and cumin. So if you wanted to add a little bit of salt at this time, I might put a little bit in, but honestly, I tried this at home without any, and all of the spices that we just added gave it enough flavor that I didn't really think it was needed. So I'm just going to blend all of this together, and then we will move on from there. And actually, while this is blending, hopefully you can still hear me, I wanted to talk a little bit about what's called the MIND diet. MIND stands for Mediterranean and Dash Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay, which is a lot of really long words, but basically means it's a lot of foods that can help with preserving your brain function. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is because June is actually National Alzheimer's Awareness Month and Brain Month. So we talk a lot about foods on Learning Kitchen Live that are good for your physical health, but maybe not so much for your cognitive and mental health. And so a lot of the foods that prevent inflammation in your body for those types of health benefits, physical health benefits, can also prevent inflammation in your brain and protect your neurons. I'm just going to keep blending this for a little bit. So MIND, like I said, kind of combines aspects of the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet, but rather than focusing on a specific or strict diet per se, it really just emphasizes 9 or 10 foods to eat more of and maybe 5 foods to eat a little bit less of. And so some of the foods to eat more of include the vegetables and leafy greens, whole grains, and legumes that we're including in this recipe. So I wanted to highlight that for this month. So it looks like this is blended pretty well. I want to maintain some of the texture, not make it completely pureed. So I'm going to just transfer this to a bowl. And then I'm going to add in my half a cup of corn and 1 cup of panko breadcrumbs. So I didn't put these in the food processor because I want to maintain some of the texture. If you think about a corn fritter, there's usually some whole corn kernels in there too. So this will help to maintain some of that texture. And this was just frozen corn. I left it out of the freezer for maybe half an hour ahead of time. You could also use canned, whatever's accessible to you. The panko is going to help also to make them nice and crispy when we do cook them. You could make this in an air fryer or on an electric grill, like a stovetop George Foreman grill, countertop. But we're also going to cook them on top of the stove today, and so that panko helps them to crisp up a little bit. So now that this is blended together, I'm going to portion everything out into about a half a cup patties, shape them, and put them on my baking sheet that I've lined with parchment paper. This is going to go in the freezer for a couple of reasons. One, usually when you make some sort of patties like this, there's egg or some sort of binding agent to hold everything together. But since we're not using that, if we went to put these in the pan right now, they would kind of just fall apart. So we're going to put them in the freezer first so that they hold their shape a little bit better. And this makes about 6 patties. So the other reason that I like putting these in the freezer is then you've got meals prepped for 6 days ahead of time, and you can just pull them out one at a time from the freezer, put them in the air fryer or on top of the stove, and it takes very little time from there to actually cook them. If you don't like this flavor combination, this recipe also has a lot of versatility to it. So once you add the chickpeas and the rice, you can kind of include whatever other flavors that you enjoy. So if you don't like the cilantro and some of the Southwest flavors that we put in with the spices, you could also do like an Italian seasoning blend, and maybe instead of the cilantro, do some fresh basil. Instead of the corn, you could do sun-dried tomatoes. So that would be another way to switch up this recipe, but still give you that complete protein from a plant-based meal. So what I would do next is put my 6 patties in the freezer. But while that's happening, I'm going to make a little bit of our aioli, which is going to go with our patties to serve. And so an aioli is basically another word for a condiment that contains mayonnaise, usually some sort of lemon juice or lime juice, and some spices. So today I have 1/4 cup of mayonnaise. I used the olive oil blended mayonnaise because that's a little bit better, and again, that's one of those foods that the Mind diet highlights. You could also use yogurt. A lot of times we use unflavored or plain Greek yogurt as a mayonnaise substitute, so you could try that too. Then I'm just going to juice half of a lime. If you have lemon juice at home, that would also work. And then I'm going to add in a couple of spices that just kind of amplify the same spices that we put into our patties. So I have a 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder and a 1/2 teaspoon of cumin, and I'm going to mix that in here too. So just with a fork, we'll whisk this together pretty quickly. Again, you can kind of alter this based on whatever seasonings you enjoy, but this really complements the patties well once they're crisped up and gives it a nice little dressing. Thankfully, since this is Learning Kitchen Live, I already prepared some of the patties ahead of time that have been frozen. And so what we'll do next is just prepare some of those on top of the stove. So I've coated my skillet here with just a little bit of canola oil. You could also use olive oil. And I'm going to heat this over a medium-high heat. And then we'll cook the patties for about 4 minutes. They don't really take that long because everything that's going into this has already been pre-cooked. We just want them to be heated through and get a little bit crispy on each side. So I have some of my patties that have already been frozen. I just cut them on the parchment paper to make them really easy to get out of the freezer. And I made about 6, but it looks like only 3 are going to fit in the pan for now. So we'll just let this heat up. And like I said, you can also use an air fryer. You could also use one of those countertop grills. That's a good substitution. Another reason why I really love this recipe is all of the ingredients are very accessible. So we're using frozen corn, we're using some canned legumes, brown rice, pretty much safe, shelf-stable ingredients. Apart from the spices, I got everything at the store this morning for under $15. And so when you're thinking about feeding a family of 6 people, that comes down to less than $3 per serving, which is really great. Thinking about fast food options, it's hard to find something out there that's comparable. Like I said, feel free to get creative with some of those spice substitutions with whatever you might have at home that you do enjoy. I think the cilantro goes pretty well with this, and those fresh herbs and spices are part of the Mind diet too. So I said earlier that that includes about 10 foods that we want to eat more of and 5 foods that we want to eat less of. So the 10 that it focuses on to increase in your diet are actually vegetables, and specifically non-starchy leafy green vegetables. Berries are part of the Mind diet. So of all of the fruits, berries have the highest level of antioxidants. So they're going to prevent some of that oxidative stress in your body, and particularly in your brain. Nuts are part of the Mind diet as well. So if you enjoy cashews, walnuts, almonds, anything in that family is going to be really good for your brain function. Olive oil, like I said, so we're using that olive oil blended mayonnaise and also cooking in an olive oil or canola oil, some sort of plant-based oil. Whole grains and beans and legumes, so we're incorporating some ingredients from those families into today's recipe. And then the Mind diet also focuses on fish or seafood, poultry or white meat, and wine. So everyone likes to hear that. You can include a serving of wine on a daily basis. That can actually help with your brain function. Everything in moderation, right? The 5 foods that the Mind diet emphasizes to limit are actually butter and margarine, so some of those animal-based fats, red meat, cheese, fried food, and then pastries or sweets. So a lot of this information probably isn't new to you. It overlaps with a lot of what we talk about with healthy eating in general. But I like a lot of the principles of this diet because it's easy to follow and incorporate, as opposed to following something that's really strict and rigid. So like I said, these don't really take too much time, maybe 3 or 4 minutes, because everything that goes into them is already cooked. So this one in particular is starting to crisp up really nice. Just going to give it another minute or two, and then we'll serve it. I had a question before the class of how do you usually eat these? And there's a number of ways that you could include them for a meal. I don't particularly enjoy having them on a bun as a burger because there's already brown rice mixed into the patty. That seems like a lot of starch and it can become kind of dense. So I'm just gonna serve it over a bed of some salad greens. In particular, I got arugula because it has a really nice kind of peppery, almost borderline bitter taste, but I think that kind of cuts some of the flavor with the patties, so it's a really nice blend. So I'll go ahead and plate that. Again, feel free to include whatever greens that you do enjoy. If you wanted to serve this alongside some sort of lean meat, that would be appropriate too. But I think it is a pretty satisfying meal in itself with just a little bit of vegetables and the aioli. So I think when I portioned these out before, I may not have been very specific with my measuring cup, and some of them are definitely bigger than others and taking a little bit longer to cook. But it looks like this one here is just about ready. So it's nice and crispy. Again, you can keep cooking it a little bit longer, but we're not looking for any particular internal temperature because it is all plant-based ingredients and everything has been pre-cooked ahead of time. So I would just plate this on top of my arugula or salad greens. I'm going to include a little bit of this Chipotle aioli on top. And there you have a great balanced meal with some sort of grain, a lean protein, and some vegetables. So I hope that you give this recipe a try at home and alter it as you like to include the flavors that you enjoy. Thank you for joining us this week, and we hope to see you again next week on Learning Kitchen Live.